about that later?
Oh, okay.
Is that okay? We're trying to hurry here, Jess. You're just going to keep repeating these same mistakes over and over and over and over
really
again.
good.
And I know because I've done it for years.
Yeah.
The last 3 years have taught us anything.
Yeah.
It's that none of us were prepared for the mental health crisis that hit the world. And the hits keep on coming.
Yeah. These keyboard warriors just say the most disgusting, horrific things with no consequences. I didn't want to just do the best I could with what I knew. I wanted to actually do the best I could.
Well, welcome to the next episode of the Mental Health Janitors, where we help you clean up the mess in your head. I'm your host, Sgt Q, and with me as always, Doc Jess.
Welcome.
So today we're going to be talking about video games again. We talked about that before. We're going to bring that back, and we're going to share with you guys some really cool advancements that they have around mental health and video games. So games specifically designed to help people with their mental health journey. We're also going to talk about some of the negative effects of online gaming, like Call of Duty specifically, which is a super toxic environment, and they recognize that. And so we'll share with you guys some of the things they've done to try and improve that platform to eliminate a lot of that bullying and hate speech that happens inside the technology. We're also going to talk about a Geneogram. So I don't know exactly what that is. So what is that, Jess? Tell us about the new tool for our toolbox, the Geneogram.
Yeah, sure. The Geneogram is like a clinical, controlled, big family tree. So if you think of a family tree, it's really like the clinical use of how do we take the family tree a little further to help us in a clinical counseling session.
Okay. So family tree, but in a psychology lane. So we'll take a look and see what that is. And then our practical application, I think, is just going to be me going through the Geneogram, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't like that smile. So stay tuned for that. We do this segment at the end of every single one of our episodes because we want to show you guys these are the different types of therapies that could happen if you go and start seeing a mental health professional. We want to expose you guys to these things in a very short, controlled environment, take away some of that fear and apprehension of what it could look like to see a mental health professional. So that way you guys can be educated, empowered, and encouraged on your mental health journey. Well, with that, let's get into it.
All right.
So when we talk about video games for mental health, let's get into that. What does that look like? Because we've all played, well, my generation, I grew up in the 8-bit generation with Mario. So I've been a gamer since I could walk. Okay. Had a controller in my hand. I've been playing them, but now they're specifically designing them for mental health. So tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, and for me, the apprehension, it has always been, I see a lot of negative effects of video games and the lack of structure or discipline around them. And so it was hard for me to even consider that there's a benefit for mental health. However, in June of 2020, the FDA approved their first prescription video game. And really that kind of puts an end to lingering doubts about the safety of their usage if we're talking about the FDA approved prescribed video game. And that prescribed video game specifically was, and I don't know much about it, but it's specifically for ADHD, children diagnosed with ADHD between the ages of 8 and 12. And so you can use that as a parent or caregiver, knowing that it's safe for ages 8 and 12 and it's beneficial. It's been through, we've talked about the FDA approval process before in a couple sessions ago, and how much research, development, trials go through that process in order to be FDA approved. So there's some security behind knowing, hey, my kid is playing an FDA approved prescription video game for their mental health. And really it just helps in the multitasking realm for kids with ADHD.
And one of the really cool things about the fact that it is FDA approved, it means that there are metrics inside the game that they can actually measure and it's accountable to someone, to a therapist, to a parent. But that's part of the FDA approval, is that the data collected, it's number one, the aggregate data is super valuable, but number two, it's being reflected to a professional who can then help the individual make better decisions for their mental health.
Right.
Super, super important. So yes, when your children are playing these specific games, it's being moderated by somebody and the data is being looked over, which makes it a lot safer for an individual to use. And when we get into our next segment, we're going to talk about the unregulated market for video games, where it's a free-for-all. It's like the Wild West, and it can be detrimental. So really, we're talking about video games, but on the complete opposite spectrum of each other, where this FDA approval process, it's rigorous, and there are specific metrics that have to be met as far as monitoring goes and reflecting that data back. So it's a lot different than the 8-bit Mario or the games that they may play on their phone or Call of Duty, things like that. It's specifically designed to help them with whatever mental health condition they're struggling with, to build the skills and resiliency to hopefully not need that video game anymore. That's the whole goal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, and we can dive in also in how video games, and we're probably going to talk about it later, how they can be incredibly negative for your mental health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know firsthand about that. So yeah, in our next segment, we will talk about that. What I really like about taking video games and bringing them in to the FDA approval process and bringing them to help people with mental health, because it really shifts the paradigm. There's so many parents out there who are just negative about video games because you have super violent ones out there that are not good. You know, the video games get blamed for a lot of things, right? School shootings or drug use or all these different things get kind of just lumped together and put on these video games. So it's great to see people in the industry.
That was me.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Changing the paradigm of, hey, these can actually be helpful if you use them properly. And so being a gamer myself, I love that. And here's what I really hope. This is my real hope, is that as they start building these out specifically for mental health conditions, that we're going to learn what are the pieces that they're utilizing in this FDA approved game that are beneficial to mental health.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
Then the unregulated market can look at this and say, hey, these are really good components. These are really good pieces to use. How can we now incorporate that in the mainstream video game world that doesn't detract from that video game experience, but it enhances it because they're using these techniques that are being regulated by the FDA and utilizing them now in mainstream gaming. That's what I look for in the future. This is brand new. It's just starting to come out. They're just starting to learn these things. But as we start to see this in the scientific field, when we can quantify this data and see, okay, this is the specific component of this technology that's helping with mental health. How do we now take this piece and we start adding it into these other game systems that are used by a wide variety of people? So we can start to help these video games can actually be beneficial to mental health, kind of on the low, right? Without it being like, oh, mental health video game. Yeah. But just taking these components, these things that we learn and putting them in play in ththese other games to help build mental resiliency. Yeah. That's what I'm super excited about.
Right. And I think about how the gaming world has kind of prepped. There's cool things about gaming. You get those good shots of dopamine and things like that show you how our body works and how our mind works and goals and growth and things of that nature. But also, like, it helps prepare the way for instance, your Q actual app, right? Of making it not just here is an app for mental health, but putting that gaming part on the app to attract people who game and those hits of dopamine that you get from like leveling up, right?
That's right. Yeah. So that's one of the components that we're building in right now. So our app is out there. You guys can use it. It's totally for free. You can download it and utilize it. And it's really in its early adoption phase right now. Yeah. So it's just out there. It's kind of bare bones, but we've got all this gamification pieces coming online in 2024. It's being built out right now to help drive that engagement because we understand how the brain operates. And so we're putting components into the technology to help you stay consistent with checking in with your mental health journey and staying consistent with doing these little micro learning pieces that we're literally building right now, these little micro learning pieces. So we talked about CBT and how that works. Adding some of that into the game or into the app We're going to gamify it so you get points and streaks and all these different things to keep you engaged the whole time you're learning about your brain-body connection and you're learning these skills that you need for the long term. And so here's what I love about video games and how it reflects our own life. So think about it like this. When you're playing a video game, no matter what it is, the farther you progress, the more points that your character gets, the stronger they become. Because as they get to the next level, the boss is going to be harder. The level is going to be harder. And if you didn't level up your character, you're not going to win. So you might have to go back and repeat some things, level up your character so that way they have the right tools and equipment available to beat that next level and move on to the next stage, right? That's life. That is our life.
Yeah, I never thought about it like that.
Right? So if we're not gaining these skills and learning these things, we're going to stay at the level that we are. We're never going to be able to progress because we're not going to have the skills. We're not going to be strong enough to get to that next level. So think about your own mental health journey. If you are avoiding going to see therapists, if you're avoiding reading books about mental health, if you're avoiding having conversations and learning these skills, you're just going to keep repeating these same mistakes over and over and over and over again.
Really good.
And I know because I've done it for years.
Yeah. Ask me how I know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so all these books, that Jessica has here, I've read a lot of these books. I read other books. I've taken classes. I've invested in myself and my mental health journey. I've seen therapists. I see a therapist every week here on the Mental Health Janitors.
Okay.
But I do all of that because I want to know more. I want to be better. I want to be faster at overcoming traumatic experiences. I want to be stronger so that way when that next thing comes, I can handle it better. I want to be able to help other people. I want to be strong enough to be able to help other people in their journey. I'm leveling myself up because I know the challenges that are coming are going to be so much harder than the ones I've been through. What got me here is not going to get me there.
Yeah,
and so I got to level myself up. So when I think of like your mental health journey, I look at it like a video game. And if you want to progress to that next level, you've got to become emotionally mature. You've got to become, spiritually strong to be able to get to that next level of life. If the last 3 years have taught us anything, it's that none of us were prepared for the mental health crisis that hit the world. And the hits keep on coming.
Yep.
We had COVID, we had the civil unrest, we've had the war in Ukraine, the war in Israel. Like these things have just been getting progressively worse. If you haven't noticed, you haven't paid attention. It's just getting worse. So that means we have to get stronger.
Yeah.
And we hope that we can do that here today on the Mental Health Janitors, where we help you guys, we educate you, we empower you, and we encourage you to take these things home and utilize them. All right, I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah. No, that's good. That was a good soapbox.
So that's some of the games that are out there. You can do a quick Google search. You're going to find all kinds of different prescription-based video games specifically designed for your mental health, and more coming out every single month. So check those out. You'll be able to find some really useful tools there. Now let's talk about the negative aspect of gaming. And I'll let you start, Jess, because you had the negative bias toward video games, which is warranted.
Yeah.
Which is warranted, okay? Because there's some really bad games out there. I won't have to name any of them, but one of them has to do with like stealing cars. It's like in the name of the game. It's really bad. So what is your perception of these video games, and how has that changed after the research?
Okay. I'm only going to go off of really my own personal experience with clients I have.
Okay.
And so, because I've read research and I can talk about research, but there's not a personal affiliation with the research. But in my own practice, private practice as a counselor, I see a lot of adolescents with an unhealthy relationship with gaming piling on to their mental health challenges. So social anxieties and laziness and lack of motivation for homework. There's so many things that video games get in the way of them becoming a productive member of society. And so when the video games, not just like right, we can have a whole different podcast on the content of these video games, and we'll touch on one in a little bit, in a minute or so when I'm off my soapbox. But let's even take away the context of the video games for now and remember that 20 years ago, we didn't have these video games to escape to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's only so much duck hunting you can do. Us growing up, there's only so much Mario Kart you can play. Now there's so much. There's not enough time in a day to play all the games that are out there, and so we see this downward spiral of kids not getting outside and playing like they used to, not making friends with the neighborhood kids like they used to, not having those awkward encounters with kids that you can escape to your tablet, to your phone, to your VR, to your PlayStation, to your Xbox, whatever it is, you can escape to that. And as parents, it's our first natural instinct to say, oh yes, I don't want my kid to be uncomfortable.
Right.
I don't. I hate the feeling of my kid being uncomfortable, but they have to be uncomfortable to grow. There's no growth being comfortable. None.
No
Zero.
growth in the comfort zone.
No. And so this is where, from my soapbox, I would appease my parents out there. If you don't have a structure and boundaries around video games, start with something and stop allowing it to be an scapegoat for your kids to avoid uncomfortable situations. I know it doesn't feel good as a parent. I know every kid has social anxiety or whatnot. Social anxiety wasn't real 30 years ago because we didn't have an option to have social like it is now, right? And so meet me offline, have a few sessions with me to help you start a starting point program of building some structure or boundaries around video games or screen times. But let's talk a little bit about the negative, what can be a negative aspect of some of the content of these video games.
Yeah, absolutely. Before that, so I'm going to give Jess a plug here. She does an amazing parenting class. So if you guys want to check that out, she does it in person and she's getting ready to start doing it online as well. So you can find the link to that to sign up on our webpage, thementalhealthjanitors.com. If you're interested in that, you want to know more information, she's got the curriculum. She's been teaching it for a long time and she's just going to now start doing it virtually as well. So that'll be an opportunity for you guys if you want to check that out. Some great info in there. But back to this. Yes. So some of the negative things that happen in the video game. So I want to talk a little bit about how video games have changed, and then I'll talk about why it's so negative. So they've changed. Video games, it used to be where you played in your house with a couple of buddies and you played through a game, and it was very linear. It was very set parameters of how you're going to progress through all 8 worlds of Mario.
Yeah.
Right? And so you kind of knew what to expect. You played a level and then you died. You could go back and play that level again. There were patterns in every one of these games. If you look at Pac-Man, they've literally taken Pac-Man and they've broke it down. And actually, they've done this better with Miss Pac-Man. They've broke it down to a formula, a mathematical formula. So it's super easy to beat Mrs. Pac-Man if you know the pattern that the ghosts are going to go in. If you know that pattern, it's very simple to beat the game. It's the same thing with like a Rubik's Cube. There's a specific pattern. It doesn't matter what shape those little squares are in. There's a specific pattern that you use to turn it, and you're going to win. Right? So it's a very linear, very set parameters on the win-loss function of the game, which most people will never figure out. But if you figure out the pattern, super easy to win. Very linear, right? Start and end. How it's changed is when they started putting in massive multiplayer online gaming. So this is your Call of Duty. This is your Grand Theft Auto. This is your Fortnite, where you're playing the same map. The map never changes. The map is always going to be the same. But the way the players interact with the map is different, because now you're not playing with just your buddies in your room anymore. You're playing with hundreds of other people all over the country, all over the world. And their gameplay style might be different than yours. Not just that, but they have random AI in there that are going to operate different. Mm-hmm. They're going to be in different areas of the map. The weapon loadouts are going to be in different areas of the map. Same thing with vehicles. All these things are going to be randomized inside this same map. So you may know the map, but the individuals you're playing against are going to change every single game, and where the loot and the weapons and vehicles are going to be located all changes. So you're never going to play the same game twice. You could play 1,000 games and you're never going to find a pattern because it's all randomized, because you're playing against all these other players that have different loadouts and play different. So you could play 1,000 games, 10,000 games, 100,000 games, and it's never going to be the same because the way they've structured the game. So that keeps you engaged longer. So you could play this same map 1,000 times and your brain is going to see it different every time, because the way you're interacting with it. So now instead of it being Mario and you go through world 1 through 8 and then you understand the pattern, you played it, it's not fun anymore because you know where that turtle is going to pop up, right? You know how many times Bowser is going to jump before he shoots a fireball. You know that pattern. Yeah. There are no more patterns. So your brain is seeing something new every time, which keeps you engaged. Or addicted.
Yes.
Right? Because you're always getting a fresh hit of dopamine because you're seeing something new every time. So that's how it changed and why we're seeing the mental health conditions that we see with people being addicted to video games. Now, that's one side. The second thing, which is incredibly detrimental, is the toxicity, the level of toxicity inside the game because of the members playing. So now you have, if you were on, let's say, on the playground and you're playing stickball, okay, and you start running your mouth and mouthing off to somebody, there's a good chance they may come over and punch you right in the kisser. All right. Like that's a real thing. Like growing up, you run your mouth, you might get a black eye. Like there are legitimate real world consequences to running your mouth. Like just realistic. Now, when you're in your house behind your gaming system and controller, you can talk all the trash you want and there's no real world consequence. Yeah. Nobody's going to come over and punch you in the mouth. So people are a lot more brazen to say things online that they would never say in person because there's a real world consequence saying that in person. Yeah. But online, they're more brazen, they're more bold to say derogatory things. So Call of Duty has been named one of the most toxic games out there. And that's not me. I mean, you look at GeekWire, you look at all these different gaming platforms, they all talk about how toxic this game is because they weren't regulating people's voice chat, people's names on their gamer tags, or the in-chat feature that you could do. So it was becoming super toxic, super quick. And it's one of the reasons I stepped away from it. So for years ago, I stepped away from this platform because I would be playing and somebody wants to talk trash. I'm a Marine. I can talk some trash. And I'd get right into that. And I'd start saying some horrible, foul things. And I'll never forget it. My wife came in one day and she looked at me and she said, "Are you serious?" She goes, "That is some 12-year-old kid. And you just said what about his mother?" And I'm like, "You're right." And I didn't touch it again. I just said, "You know what? I'm done." And I unplugged it and it just sat there for years. I never played it again. I just recently got back into gaming, Call of Duty again, but they've put a tremendous amount of safeguards in place because they realize the toxicity of the game. So now they're using AI, which if you guys know me, you know I love AI. It's not going to take over the world, just telling you. But what it's doing is they put this AI bot inside of the chat feature. So now when you and me are chatting on our headset, it's picking up keywords and it can monitor my chat. And if I'm saying some things that are racist or derogatory or foul, it's going to pick that up. And if it picks up enough of those, it's going to send me a warning and tell me, "Hey, this is your warning because of your chat or because of your voice chat or whatever it was, they're going to give me a warning." Now, the really cool thing, I just read a report on this, 20% of the people who got a first warning never got a second violation. Since they instituted this, it was like just a couple months ago, they instituted this bot that monitors everybody's chat. But only 20% of people who got a warning. So that means 80% of the people continue to reoffend. So they started to put real world consequences to that action. Now, you're not going to get punched in the face, but if you get a second violation, they're going to restrict your ability to voice chat. So that's going to be turned off for you. If you continue to reoffend, they'll suspend your account for weeks or months. And if you continue to reoffend past that, they will just delete your whole profile. So they're starting to put these real world consequences that we would experience from the playground inside this gaming system now, which is going to make it a better environment for everybody.
Yeah.
So now learning all of that, what do you think about the AI and putting this level of control inside the game? Do you think it's going to help?
I know nothing about video games or how from your explanation.
Well, no, I was going to say from your perspective as being a mental health professional, could you see this as being something, having real world consequences?
Yes, absolutely.
And tell me why. Why would that work?
Okay, sure. Because life has real world consequences, like your whole analogy about the playground. And plugging for the parenting class for me, it's all about consequences and being consistent with those consequences, and sometimes allowing our kids to suffer those natural consequences, right? Because sometimes they need to learn on their own. However, in a video game, you're so right that these keyboard warriors are just say the most disgusting, horrific things with no consequences. And so like it's been repeatedly clear in research and the Bible and living life that if you don't have consequences for your actions, there's no motivation to change.
That's true.
And so absolutely starting to throw in some real world consequences to this kind of behavior is going to help. I don't see any other explanation or outcome other than it helping. And heck, I say go even farther and fine these people and use the money for good.
Oh, fine. I thought you meant find. Like we're going to start doxing
Find
people.
them.
I'm like, that's not legal.
No. Fine. Fine. Fine them. And then this money can go towards, rebuilding people who've been bullied. I don't know.
So a lot of people invest a lot of time and money into their gamer profile, building up that whatever character that is. So when they look at that being in jeopardy, that's that consequence of losing that is going to tamper that behavior is my guess.
Yeah.
All right. So that's it for video games. I'm sure it's a conversation we're going to have multiple times as this
over
progresses.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's get into the tool for our toolbox, the Geneogram. Talk about the tool for our toolbox, the Geneogram. This is the first time I've heard of this. And when you told me a little bit about it, I understand it. But maybe we can go a little bit deeper and explain to the people what the Geneogram is, and then tell us why this would be effective.
Sure. There are some counselors that do a Geneogram with every single one of their clients because they believe so much in it. It's never been something I've really dug into myself as a therapist, but I do remember learning about it in grad school, and it's something I would like to learn more about, which is why I'm bringing it to you today. So I'm learning on this process with you. I do know that generational trauma can be real. And I do know that habits can be passed down.
Sins of the father, right?
Yeah. And we learn, right? Nature versus nurture. A lot of the things, coping mechanisms, negative and positive, survival techniques we're learning as children in those years that we're sponges from our main caretakers. And so it is, it's beneficial to go back and map out visually, right? And so we're gonna put on the screen like what a Geneogram looks like, and you'll see that squares for a male, a circles for a female. They have labels of showing that you're deceased, relationship types, married, casual relationships, temporary sexual relationships, divorces, separated widows, or just cohabitating, right? And then there's other signs for how many children your siblings had and stuff like that. And then also there's signs for emotional relationships. So there's normal, there's indifferent, there's distant, there's even abuse in there, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. And what the process does is, as we're drawing these little symbols, is we're seeing in our family line maybe some things that might bring up, oh, well, maybe that's where that comes from.
You start to see some patterns
developing. And it helps you look at it and be like, what patterns do I want to break? And not pass on to my generations behind me. And so really what this I don't know exactly what this is going to look like on the podcast, but me and you are going to go in, and on this little grid, we're going to draw your family tree.
So the Geneogram is just like a family tree, but of emotional relationships?
Not just emotional relationships, but also, for instance, statistics and studies show, not as much as it used to, but if you come from 10 generations of a husband and wife that stayed married for 60 years until death, that generation continues on of people getting married once and staying married. When if you come from a broken home, you're more likely to have a divorce or a broken relationship. And seeing those kinds of patterns and making a connection mentally with some of maybe these negative coping skills that might have been passed down to us. So it's not just emotionally, it's actually putting some logistics and research into our family tree. Okay.
It sounds confusing, but
it can be. And that's why if you are interested in doing something like a Geneogram on a professional level, there are counselors out there that really specialize in this. And people have gotten a lot of really good growth and understanding through working through a Geneogram process.
Right. And so that's the advice to all of you. Like, this sounds really overwhelming and it seems really complicated. That's why you don't do it by yourself. That's why you go to a professional, you go to a counselor, and they can walk you through these things that seem really big and overwhelming, so you can find some breakthrough and you can start to understand why you do some of the things you do and how you can change that pattern of behavior.
Yeah. And there's even websites that help you walk through it yourself.
Yeah, there are websites, but there are a million self-help books out there.
It is
really, you want somebody to coach you and guide you. Yeah, I mean, you look at every professional sports, person out there. Everybody knows how to play basketball, right? You could be good or be bad, but the guys who are professionals, they all have one thing in common. They all have a coach. Yeah. They all have somebody who is guiding them and mentoring them and walking them through these things to develop these skills. So it's the same thing with your mental health journey. Sure, you can read some books, you can do it on your own. I've done it. But where you're really going to see a lot of breakthrough and you're really going to see your ability to take this to the next level is to get in front of a professional who can then coach you through some of these processes and give you these skills. And you don't have to be with them forever, but you're going to learn these things. You're going to understand these concepts. They're going to give you some skills, and then you're going to go back and be able to utilize those in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. And so what I would ask you and Casey is if we can just take maybe 2 minutes offline, me and you jot down a quick genogram, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Perfect. Sounds great. We'll see you guys in just a minute.
Okay. So welcome back from our little break. Aaron and I just had a interesting encounter with doing his Geneogram. And so I think we just want to take a few minutes to unpack what that was like. My first question to you is, was it anything you expected?
Yes and no. I knew we were building a family tree, so I had to talk about like family history and, who people were and things like that. But it was a little bit uncomfortable because I didn't know how to answer some of the questions. I had to really think like, okay, my grandparents, were they married or not married? And, how far back and what did that look like? Was the divorces, and then I had to think about like, was there abuse in those relationships? And so I had to actually think about these things, which I had never considered before. And so I had to actually think about that, which was just uncomfortable to have to think back about your parents and grandparents and their relationships and how that stuff worked. So it was a little bit uncomfortable, that piece of it.
Sure. And you might have heard stories as a kid growing up or throughout the years, but actually bringing it to the forefront of your mind to intentionally think about it is a little different than it just kind of happening.
Right. Yeah, I had to recognize like, oh yes, that did happen.
Yeah. And then seeing, and again, what I'll do, Casey, is find an example Geneogram to show you kind of what we went through. And so there's squiggly lines for abuse, and there's slashes for divorce and things like that. And so when you can look at your family tree geneogram and see where the functionality lies and where the dysfunctionality lies, somehow you make a mental note by visualizing. What was it like looking at the visual part of the squiggly lines of abuse and the fractures of the marriages?
Yeah, it was a new way of looking at it is probably the easiest way to say. Mm-hmm. It's like a new realization, new way to looking at it. So I'm on my second marriage. So my first marriage ended in divorce, and I took full responsibility for that. That, I wasn't in a good mental health space. I didn't know how to manage these things. And so I left that relationship because I just didn't know what to do. And I've always taken responsibility for that. But by looking at this, I'm still taking responsibility, but I can understand the reason why. Because nobody taught me what it was like to be a good husband or father. Nobody taught me how to manage mental health. Nobody modeled what a good marriage looks like. My parents didn't have a good marriage. They were actually never even married. And when I looked at my grandparents on both sides, there was no functional marriages there either. So no wonder I failed at this, because nobody ever taught. This isn't something they teach you in school. Mm-mm. This isn't something they teach you out in the real world. This is something you have to learn on your own. And I was never exposed to what a healthy marriage looked like. Mm-hmm. And so no wonder I failed at this, because it's not something that just comes natural to us. We have to be taught how to do these things properly. Mm-hmm. So I still take responsibility for my actions, but now I understand a little bit more of why. And so I can give myself a little bit more grace for that first failed marriage.
Yeah. And because I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing that I explain to people as I'm walking through these issues with them is it's not necessarily me making, not at all me making excuses for their mistakes or their actions. And it's allowing us to find the reason for it, so they know a starting point of growth. And so for your example, Aaron, is from that failed marriage, you have a starting point of where you went wrong, how you went wrong, why you went wrong. Okay, where do we grow from there?
Right.
And it's another analogy that I like to bring up. A lot of soldiers, I like to really counsel veterans. And a lot of us veterans struggle with PTSD. And a lot of the symptoms from PTSD is anger. And if you've never been taught how to channel your anger or deal with your anger in a healthy way, which a lot of veterans don't, it comes out in very destructive ways. Punching doors, punching walls, emotionally abusing people out of anger, even at extreme cases, physically abusing people out of your anger. And in no way, shape, or form, as we're unpacking these reasons why they get there, am I excusing their behavior, but giving some perspective so that they can find their starting point to recover and learn new ways to handle their anger, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm really big on self-growth. And so you have to be intentionally investing in your growth. And there's tons of areas that you can grow. You can grow in business, you can grow in leadership, but you really need to grow in your emotional maturity. You really need to grow in the skills to be able to have healthy relationships. And so you don't build healthy relationships, you build skills that allow you to build a healthy relationship. Exactly. Like, I want to build a house. Well, you need to learn how to do carpentry. You need to learn how to do painting. You need to learn how to do electricity. You need to learn how to do plumbing. Yeah. You have to build all these skills, then you can build a house. So if you want to build a healthy relationship, a healthy marriage, you have to build these skills. And what this was really cool is it showed you the areas where you are going to struggle, the areas where you're lacking. And it also some of the positive areas. So I looked at this and I saw that my middle sister has really broken that generational curse. She's been married for almost 20 years now. She'll be celebrating her 20-year anniversary this year. So she is somebody that, even me being the older brother, somebody that I can look up to for having a healthy marriage with her and her husband. I can look to that and say, what did they do that was so successful? And I can glean some information. And my little sister, Stephanie, she's only been married for like 4 or 5 years, but she's still more successful than I was in my first marriage. So I can look and see how they are teaching me things, and there's somebody that I can look at as an example of doing something positive and having success.
And I love that you brought up that constant personal growth. And I tell you what, you gave me the plug for the parenting class. I can't tell you how many parents I've heard say this: I did the best I could with what I had. Mm-hmm. And then I furthermore say, okay, what books did you read on parenting or child growth and development? None. Well, you didn't do the best you could. If you just do what you know, that's not the best you can do ever. And that's a terrible excuse. So I had incredible parents from all aspects. And I still continued to read and to grow as a parent myself, because I didn't want to just do the best I could with what I knew. I wanted to actually do the best I could. And so I challenge all of you and myself and you to not just do the best we can with what we have, but what it really is the best we can.
Yeah. And that knowledge is power. Like, even as Jess said that, like, that's something I say. Oh, I did the best I could with what I had. That's what I say. But when you frame it that way, that's not good enough. And I had to look back at that and say, you're right. That's not good enough. Maybe nobody has told you that before. Until you said that, no one had ever said that to me. Even all the books that I've read, the things that I've done, nobody has said, well, the best you have, done the best you have, or the best you could with what you had is not good enough. And I had to look at that and be like, you're right. It's not. You have to be intentional about your growth. So my kids are adults. And so for me, a lot of that parenting side has passed. I've missed those opportunities because I didn't know they existed. I didn't take the time to invest when they were little. Now that they're adults, I do invest in them, and I invest in their growth. Mm-hmm. And I try to I can't make up for that lost time, but I try and teach them what I know now that I've been intentionally growing, intentionally trying to do better and be better. I try to put that onto them, showing them that they can do the same thing.
And disclaimer, this isn't a plug to shame you or to guilt you.
Oh yeah, no, not at all.
This is just take a genuine inventory on your life, and can you really say I did the best I could with the most important job you will ever be given in life is being a caregiver of your children. And so if you're going about just doing like the best you can with what you've been taught through your child, that's not the best you can really do. And so don't look back and say, oh crap, I've screwed my kids up. Just be like, oh, this is a really good point. I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to go to a parenting class, or I'm going to do something to gain knowledge so I can be better than I was with what I had.
So just like Jess said, take a personal inventory and ask yourself, am I where I want to be? And if the answer is no, how do you get there? We have a lot of resources that we put and we make available on this podcast. You can always reach out to us as well. If you're like, hey, I'm not where I want to be. Maybe you took offense to that. Like, who do you think you are telling me? We're not telling you anything. We're just speaking from our own experience. And if that's touching you, then maybe it's something you want to look at, because if you're not where you want to be, then how do you get there? And maybe we have the answer. Maybe we can give you the resource or get you connected to the resource that's going to be that for you. Maybe not. Maybe there's somebody else in your life. Maybe you can go to your pastor. Maybe you have a mental health professional and you're like, hey, I need to work on this parenting thing, or I need to work on this piece, whatever it is. When we hit that little part of the conversation that makes you uncomfortable, that's a catalyst for change. That's your brain telling you, hey, there's something not working here. What they're saying is not conducive to what we currently believe. And so we have to make a mental shift. Otherwise, it's going to continue to bug you. You have to make that mental shift. You have to grow. That discomfort is a catalyst for you to grow. And I'm telling you because that's been my experience. When I have an experience and something makes me uncomfortable, I know intrinsically now that I need to grow in that area. Yeah. And a lot of times I don't know how to grow in that space. That's why I've been doing it wrong the whole time. That's why I feel discomfort, because I don't know what to do in that space. So I look around me and say, who is having success in this area? And let me go find that person to ask questions. Mm-hmm. One of the questions that got asked to me earlier today, I'm in this group with all these other entrepreneurs, and they said, I'm thinking about bringing on a business coach, somebody to coach me in business. Is it worth the money? And so that's a really open-ended question. So the first thing I always ask when somebody asks me, well, should I get a business coach? Or if they're considering a business coach, I ask them this question. The person that you want to coach you, have they had success in business? Or is their business just being a coach? Like if they've never run a Fortune 500 company, why would you want them coaching you in your Fortune 500 company? If all they've ever done is manage a company of 20 people and your company has 100, why would you want that person to tell you how to operate this 100-person company? So when you're looking for a coach, when you're looking for a professional, when you're looking for somebody to help you grow in a specific space, you want to find somebody who's already had success in that area. So that's the same thing I'm going to tell you when it comes to your mental health journey. If there's a specific area when you're listening to us that you're like, I need to grow in that space, go find someone who has success in that space and ask them what they did to be successful. They're going to say, oh, I talked to this counselor. Oh, I read this book. Oh, I joined this group. I did these things and that helped me find success. So look around to the people that you know and trust and ask them what they did to have success in that specific area. If you want help in parenting and your best friend, let's say their kids are, going sideways, probably don't want to ask them about parenting advice, right? Yeah. But if you look at somebody and they have great kids, they're not having problems, raising their kids are doing great. Maybe that is somebody that you want to have available as a resource for you. So when these things make you uncomfortable, I really want you to do that inventory, like Jess said, and then go find somebody in your life that's having success in that area and ask them how they did it.
That's good. Yeah. And also, just on the other side of that, some mental health counselors haven't been through everything you might have been through, but a lot of them have the education to still be able to handle it. And so, for instance, the mental health counselor I had that helped me so much, she was never in the military, and I still got so much out of her. Right. And so I just, it's kind of like a little disclaimer. 90% of the time that is true. I don't want you to get discouraged if you can't find a counselor maybe that hasn't been through the exact same thing as you, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And so when I'm talking about finding advice, I'm not talking about the mental health professional. I'm talking about who do we go to first? We go to our friends and family when we need help. So true. So don't go to somebody who has been, if you're having problems in your marriage, don't go and ask the guy who's got 6 wives. Yeah. Hey, man.
Don't trust a skinny cook.
That's right.
Right?
Right. So find somebody who you look at their marriage and say, man, you've been married for 20 years. What's your secret? What do you do? Yeah. Those are the people that you want to go after. Yeah. They're going to get you connected to the resources like mental health professionals, like books, like small groups, like seminars that are going to help you grow in that space. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. So if it wasn't clear, I apologize, but that's what I'm talking about. When you're going to ask advice, look for somebody who has been there and done that and having success. That's who you want. Yeah. All right. So that's it for us here on the Mental Health Janitors. I hope that today we could educate you, empower you, and encourage you on your mental health journey. I'm Sgt Q, and this is Doc Jess.
And we are out.
Boom, boom.